Good afternoon again, everybody. Thank you for joining session 3 of the Indiana Corn and Soybean Forum. This year, we're spreading the forum out over the week. And Monday, we heard from our director of the State Department of Agriculture, Bruce Kettler, as well as we got an update from American Soybean Association on what's going on in Washington. And yesterday, we joined the Midwest Pork Conference and got an update on our strategic plans and heard from farmers on the efforts that we're pursuing on the checkoff, both corn and soybean checkoff. And today we're going to cover biofuels issues. My name's Steve Howell, Senior Director of Industry Affairs for the Corn Growers Association, the Corn Marketing Council, as well as the Indiana Soybean Alliance. We're going to hear from Elena Jetty, Director of Biofuels for corn and soy. And she's going to have a chat with Casey's General Stores VP of Fuels, Nathaniel Doddridge. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some state legislation. There's some gasohol updates that are needed, and I'll cover a little bit of that and then give it a little feel of what we think is going to happen in session. And then we're also going to hear from Kathy Bergren, Director of Public Policy and Renewable Fuels with the National Corn Growers Association. Of course, we can't do this work without our membership and our sponsors. This week's sponsors are First Farmers Bank and Trust, as well as Bain Welker, Case IH dealer here in Indiana. Thank you to First Farmers Bank and Trust and Bain Welker for their sponsorship this week. And again, we can't do the work that we do. We can't do the advocacy work that we do without our corporate partners, as well as the membership. And we'll be hearing from Mike Beard, President of ICGA, later on in the program, just talk about the benefits of membership and why you should join. So next, I'm going to turn the program over to Elena Jetty. She's our biofuels director here in Indiana, and she's going to have a conversation with Nathaniel Doddridge, who's the Vice President of Fuels. So Elena, come on, let's get you up on the screen and you take over and tell us about the work that you're doing here in Indiana.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Good morning, everyone. As the Biofuels Director for Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance, a major part of my role and program area is to continuously build new and maintain existing relationships with those in the fuel retail industry to expand market outreach and infrastructure of ethanol and biodiesel. Before we begin, I would like to ask the audience to be thinking of questions, because afterwards, the first 5 questions typed into the chat will be eligible for a $25 gift card, compliments of Casey's. Okay, let's get this show on the road. I met our next presenter in the summer of 2018 in collaboration to onboard the very first 4 Casey's E15 location stations to Indiana. At the time we met, Nathaniel, along with his amazing fuel team, and I did not know Unleaded 88 E15, which is a common brand name you will see out in the market and in this presentation, would grow to the now over 35 locations throughout the state of Indiana. Nathaniel has over 15 years in the fuel retail industry and currently serves as the Vice President of Fuels at Casey's. I am pleased to welcome my friend and his amazing accent all the way from Acme, Iowa, Nathaniel Doddridge. Nathaniel, thank you for being with us today, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I've been in Iowa now for 3 years, and I talked to one of our store managers last week, and she said, after I got done talking to her, she was in Nebraska. She said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I can promise you I'm not from the greater Des Moines area, but yeah, thanks for having me." And, you know, my goal today is really to maybe just give you an update on where we're at, not only from a fuel industry, but also Casey's. We've made the headlines a lot over the last few weeks, but also the last couple of years as we continue to transform who Casey's is. And so, you know, as we start off, I thought it would be really good for us to really take a step back and think about really the industry in general as we think about fuel. You know, one of the challenges we face, and a lot of the feedback we get from our partners across the industry, our guests, is why don't we move very fast on certain things? And the first reason I would say that is because we're really big as a corporation, but also our business is extremely complex. And, this is a slide I actually showed to our board not too long ago. And you think about the progress of this industry over the last 15 to 16 years as I've been in it. It's transformed drastically. You think about when Casey started in the early in the 1950s, it was really a very clean vertical of the business, and it was the oil industry, and you had you started to add the C-store space. And so as we've expanded the industry over the last 50 years, you've added different pieces of the business. And most importantly for today, you added that top portion of this chart that you're looking at that shows the renewable industry. If you think about where Casey's is placed, it really is a perfect fit for us as we think about the things that we're going to talk about today. So again, as you think about what we talk about, and as you think about those questions you're going to ask to get that $25 gift card to get fuel or pizza or whatever you want from a Casey's, just remember that, again, this is hard. The business is changing, it's evolving, but at the end of the day, I feel like we're positioned as better than we've ever been to be forward thinking. So when you think about our footprint, the Casey's footprint, this surprises a lot of folks. So as we move to the next slide, our footprint, even though we started in the heart of the Midwest, I was actually a little surprised at this. Yesterday, I saw that our store count, we're actually over 2,200 locations today. So almost 2,200, almost 2,300 locations actually. So, but if you think about those locations, they're still really peppered in the heart of rural America. And so 60%, slightly a little bit less than 60% are in towns of 5,000 or less. And you think about where we're putting stores. Yeah, we're putting stores in the greater Des Moines area, but we're also putting stores in small towns across the U.S. where folks continue to pull out of. And so we continue to feel like that's a core footprint for Casey's. Yeah, as I talked about, we've transformed a lot on the fuel side, but one thing that's interesting, and I put the pictures in here at the bottom right, is one thing we're doing is we're actually rolling out our own proprietary brands. And so as we think about Casey's great pizza, great donuts, what are some of the packaged things that we can bring to the market that folks want to buy? As the headline says, we've grown our fuel footprint. We're actually over 300 locations now nationwide for E15. We're at over 1,000 locations for biodiesel. And so, we're really in this balance of what fuel we sell, but also what's going on behind the scenes at the store behind the fuel pumps. And so not only do we want to invest in the forecourt or the fuel dispensers, but we also want to invest in the backcourt and continue to make that guest experience at Casey's best in class. And so one headline that I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago is, we've historically bought, onesie, twosie locations at Casey's, but we actually are in the process of growing our footprint with a Bucky's acquisition. Some of you in Indiana might not be familiar with who Bucky's is. So what I thought I would do is just take a brief minute just to update you on this. And I wouldn't really get too wrapped around the axle on, the acquisition, but I think it probably shows you that we're going to continue to invest in the Casey's brand. And so this is the largest acquisition in Casey's history. And so hopefully by the end of the month, we'll be closing on a deal to acquire 94 convenience stores, which is great. Those are placed around Chicago. Those are in Omaha, a little bit in Western Missouri. But what's even a little bit more surprising is actually we're picking up a dealer network. And for those not familiar with the industry, that's actually where Casey's becomes a fuel supplier for for individual operators of convenience stores. And so there's about 150,000 individual operators across the US. And so this actually gives us the capability to go out and take some of the Casey's processes, take some of the Casey's influence to go out and bring those things to other retailers who might not have the capability to go do that. Again, we're an $8 billion enterprise that continues to invest in Casey's, but this will give us a network to go out and to deliver fuel and potentially look at how do we help those businesses be more sustainable? How do we help them more profitable in the markets that they're in? And so again, don't get too wrapped around the axle on the who or the what, but I do think that this really kind of shines a light on a pretty significant change for Casey's. And as we think about us being the 4th largest retailer in the country, we're really well on our way to really start to try to nibble at those guys in that second and third spot. So maybe let's shift now to a little bit of our kind of what most of you probably tuned in for is really how about Casey's and biofuel. So although the company was founded in 1959, and although we did get into ethanol blending in the early 2000s when you had some very lucrative tax credits, specifically around the federal tax credit with E10. We did some things internally prior to me that was taking advantage of selling ethanol. But there was really this gap between 2004 and 2017 when I got here, where we didn't do a whole lot. You had a lot of the renewable folks, a lot of the ethanol industry, the bio industry, really coming to Casey's and saying, "Hey, great, you got us to E10 in all of your locations, but what about E15? What about E85? What about biodiesel?" And so as I joined in August of 2017, we really started listening to those conversations like we've had with Indiana, like we've had with Missouri, like we've had with Nebraska, Iowa, and said, okay, there's something here, right? There's some value here, not only from just the base financials of the product we sell, but also a consumer here that we can appease, because look at our footprint. We are surrounded in a lot of our locations by soybeans, by corn. And so it makes natural sense for us to really blend those two things together and say, hey, why can't we be on the forefront of having higher blend? And so we started that journey really in 2017. And as I just mentioned, in 2018, we hit 900 biodiesel stores. And today we're over 1,000 biodiesel stores. And my data is a little old, I apologize, but we're now right at 300 locations where we sell E15 and E85. And so that's great. But as we switch to the next slide, I think it's important to know how are we selling it? Because as I talked about very first on this presentation, is it's complex. And the one thing I'll say is the guest for Casey's, anytime things are a little too complex, you start to really lose that guest attention. And so what we've tried to do is we've really tried to take a couple different approaches here. So the one thing we didn't talk about is we actually changed the name of E15 to Unleaded 88 about 18 months ago. And the reason we did that was really to gain alignment within our industry. We were really approaching this challenge of, you called E15 so many different things. And so how do we gain alignment is we create uniformity. And so, but further, what we've done is we've actually tried to sell Unleaded 88 a couple different ways. And so as you see on your screen, left to right, is really how we do it at most locations. And so given some of the standards at the federal and local level, you have challenges with a single hose. So selling it out of separate hose tends to be how we tend to sell E15. And so as I talked about, the guest adoption to that can be a little mixed, because as I show up every day to pick up that red nozzle, put it in my car, it becomes somewhat of natural for me. As I show up again, and now there's 3 nozzles to choose from, I tend to really not pay attention to what's on the left or what's new. I focus to what I'm used to grabbing. Fueling your car is a scary experience for a lot of people, and specifically around picking up the wrong nozzle and putting it in a tank. A funny story really quickly. I was on vacation last week, went down to Branson to spend a couple days with my wife and 3 kids, and I was fueling at a store in Branson. I see a guest pick up a diesel nozzle and stick it in her car. It scared me to death. I immediately went to that guest and said, hey, do you realize you just put that diesel nozzle in your Chevy Cruze? It was a younger lady, and she said, hey, I got this. This is a diesel Cruze. And so again, I'm sensitive to that. I know our guests are sensitive to that. So that's kind of how we sell in most instances that unleaded 88. What we've tried to do is start to really try to layer into the market what is the adoption of unleaded 88 when it comes out of a single hose, which is what you see in the middle. And so what you see in the middle is really us selling it out of a single hose. And we're able to do that in certain markets to where if you still sell it out of a separate hose on one dispenser, then you can sell it out of the same hose at other dispensers. And so you can see that in the middle. And across the bottom there, average sales, above average sales. And then when you go to the very end, as I call out best in class, we've actually taken E10 out of the store and only sell in that picture an 87 without ethanol and an unleaded 88. And that's where you, of course, you see the best in class sales ratio compared to our peers, is because that looks very much like what you put in your car on a day-to-day basis. And so those are the 3 different ways that we sell unleaded 88. And so as we shift to the next slide, I think it's important to think about what do we think is true about the current environment, about the future environment as we think about fuel. Specific to unleaded 88, anything blended with ethanol, anything fuel related, really, we know price is the influencer. So how can we continue to make sure that price is king? When we sell unleaded 88, on most times it's 5 cents cheaper than 87 E10. Hey, that's a win. The second thing we know is guests have a long memory. And this tends to be a little bit more on biodiesel than it does on ethanol. But if I ever had a bad experience with fuel, whatever that fuel was or whoever that retailer was, I never forget it as a guest. I steer clear of those things. And so you have to be very careful as you put things in the market to do it right the first time. The other thing I'll say is guests, they don't know anything about the fuel they're putting in their car. I would say that 98% of the people in this company, 36,000 employees, have no clue about the molecule behind, that goes into their cars. And so the guests are the same way. I will say that we do feel that ethanol long-term is the blend stock of choice. It will continue to add value. We feel like you saw it through COVID. You know, ethanol prices increase, RINs offset. There's still that balance of ethanol and RINs that we're going through right now. So having that full line of sight on your supply economics will continue to be really, really important for us. And I will tell you a little bit of why we might have not done it historically, because we didn't, even internally, we didn't understand those supply economics. And then the last thing I'll say is the future of fuel is muddier than ever. And I would say liquid fuel. And I think in the last 3 years, we've talked about things from 95 RON, 98 RON, more diesel in the markets. Then you have the introduction of more EVs. The future of fuel will continue to be a little muddy. And so I think those are things we know are true as we think about how we set Casey's up for success. The last thing I'll say before, the last 2 slides I'll cover before we shift into Q&A, because I think hopefully everyone has some Q&A for us, is a little on COVID. So this next slide, it's really, really busy, but the one thing I will just kind of summarize it with is red and yellow aren't great for our industry in regards to demand. You know, we're experiencing the second peak in COVID. If you think back to the worst of COVID, you know, our demand was down somewhere around 40%. That's public knowledge. Most retailers saw something like that, if not worse. If you look at this chart, this is a great chart from Opus and some other mobility data that we pulled. Again, summarizing, it's that really that social and recreation travel that we've missed out on since March. people are traveling less. I think back to last week, our volume over Thanksgiving was not great, but it was because people just aren't traveling as much. Shopping and errands takes up a lot of demand historically. That's been somewhat okay as things have opened back up. We all know that people are making changes when regards to the work environment. And so I will say at Casey's, we're still only about 30% of capacity at the store support center. And then those other things that have influence on demand, those are things that are continue to be under pressure. And so we're continuing to watch this, especially as we enter into winter, and knowing that demand historically in winter is the worst part of the year. We're a little bit wide-eyed to kind of see how things turn out. And so the last slide I'll talk about before we move it into Q&A is probably a little bit specific to this group. And I'll just kind of draw your attention to really the peak and the valley. And so I would call your attention to the red on this chart, and that's really driving traffic and driving trends that we've seen in Iowa and Indiana. I thought Indiana would be good for this conversation just because it's close to home for you guys. And you can see we saw off of January and February volume. So this goes back and looks at volume from January to February, then benchmarks the future volume off of that. You saw during the summer this gradual increase in mobility, therefore demand. But you're starting to see that curve start to really trend off. And a lot of what we're seeing with that driving traffic, if you think back to the last slide, it was that outdoor recreational traffic. And so, yeah, maybe you weren't doing your daily trip out for lunch with your friends for lunch, but maybe when you got home from work, you and your family jumped in the car just to get out of the house. I know we did that a lot during the peak of COVID. And so now in the winter, you really start to, it goes into huddle down mode. Again, being from the South, I promise you, I don't like to be out a whole lot in the winter. And so now with COVID, that's even more tight in regards to demand. And so I think that's just something for everyone on this, this meeting to kind of think about is we still have a lot of headwinds for demand. We still have no clear visibility into when things are going to kind of come out of this, but also what does it go back to? I really think that there's probably a certain amount of demand that we'll never get back. I don't know what that number is, but just something to consider as you think about your planning for the future is demand that we saw leading into COVID will look a lot different coming out of COVID. And that's probably a sustainable position for demand long term. So with that, hopefully we have some good Q&A, and we'll see who wants some Casey's pizza or some Unleaded 88.
Wow, thank you, Nathaniel, for that excellent presentation. That chart just really speaks volumes, literally, to just, where we're at with what's happening and how the domino effects of COVID, it's very impactful, clearly, to every niche of every industry. And I think Casey's you guys have really weathered this storm and continue to move forward and continue to get stations opened and expand. Obviously, your new food product and beverage product, I've been following on your Casey's app as a loyalty member. I'm excited to try yet again some other offerings that you have along with your pizza. I know we've got a couple questions here coming here. I'm going to get to Rachel in a second, but as we've worked together, and congratulations on recently becoming an award recipient of the USDA Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program. For those of you that don't know on this call here, Casey's put in to get a 50% match and was successful with that, and they're going to be expanding more biofuels offerings across the United States. I guess so, Nathaniel, with programs like that, working with Indiana Corn Marketing Council, how do you see this collaboration and partnership, benefits with Casey's and moving forward?
Yeah, good question, and thanks for the call out on the USDA. We had the luxury of having Sonny Perdue and Chuck Grassley at one of our newest locations in Ankeny about a month and a half ago, and so it's good to see them on site to really show them and really talk them through the work that has to go in to use that money. So I think about specifically that grant, and I've said this a lot over the last really 60 days as I talk to folks about why we did it, or maybe some of the challenges with it. Is why we did it, obviously, is to grow higher blends and to help us really manage through the capital challenges we have as an $8 billion business. Just because you're an $8 billion business doesn't mean money just flows from every corner of the office, right? So I have to go to fight for every dollar I can get. But as we go and go after these things, as we partnered with guys like yourself, is first of all, that funding is super beneficial, right? We wouldn't be where we were at without support from a funding perspective. The second is really about that message alignment and getting awareness out there. As I described, it's a complex business. It's a challenge. I think a lot of the influence from organizations like this to really clean up our message has been really important. And so you think about us, our move from E15 to Unleaded 88, it really came from settings like this where there was some confusion in the industry. And so I think that's where I've really tried to lean on folks like yourself to say, hey, what's everybody else doing? Again, it's hard for me to pick up the phone and call Speedway or pick up the phone and call whoever, Pump and Pantry in Nebraska. But in these settings, right, they come together. It's like, hey, this is what I saw in the market. This is the success they're having. And then that helps us kind of get over that edge and really from a financial, but also from a marketing and actually get things actually going in the market. I think about some of our conversations we had probably a year ago as we really transitioned a lot of stores in Indiana was really, how do we navigate through the state requirements for the nozzle, for the hose, for how we can sell it, how can we message it? And I think, again, influence from groups like this really help us and keep us out of the ditch.
Well, and thank you, Nathaniel, I remember when we onboarded those first stores in 2018, we quickly transitioned that E15 to Unleaded 88 when we started seeing the landscape of what was really resonating with the consumer. So I appreciate, we don't know the future. We don't know everything that consumers are going to buy. We put it out there, test it, and then make transitions, as needed. Let me get to Rachel, our guru behind the webinar. Rachel, do you have a question in the chat that you would like to ask Nathaniel from our guests?
I do. So we've got our first submitted question from Maggie. It is, with 300 E15 and E85 sites across the country, what is the average sales volume per site for ethanol blends, specifically not including E10?
Yeah, so I will say that varies. I described the three different types of ways we sell it, and so I would say at most instances you see that sales mix for higher blends around the low teens, and some people kind of look at that and they might scoff at that and say 10%, 11%, whatever that number is. Gosh, that's not much. But you think about really where the market is. Most stations, not just Cases, but anybody else is probably selling somewhere around 90 to 92% of their fuel is 87 E10. And so anytime you can introduce a fuel and get that type of buy-in, I think it goes back to that value, right? Guests will make crazy decisions to save a penny. We see it every day in our footprint. And so if you think about the highest end of, half, some of those stores, of course, when you're picking up that nozzle and that's all that comes out, it's a pretty high percentage of fuel moving through that location that are higher blends of ethanol. The one thing I'll say that's probably most important is less about the percent today. We are continuing to see folks continue to buy higher blends, and so it's not this acceleration and then deceleration. We are seeing that product hold its own year over year. And so I think that's probably the most encouraging piece as we think about percent of sales is we're seeing it grow. And that means that it's working for customers. It's not blowing their car up as some might tell you it will. But yeah, I think that's how I would probably answer that is we're growing and it continues to be a good portion of our, that's why we don't, this isn't, I've said this before, this isn't the field of dreams. It's not if you build it, they will come. We put the product out there because our guests want it.
Thank you for that, Nathaniel. I know we just got our Q&A just filled up rapid. So I don't know, Rachel, if there's a couple rapid fire questions we could target for Nathaniel that you see.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a question from Scott. As Ivy Tech Community College is moving many courses, including agriculture, into virtual learning as a response to COVID, are there resources that Casey has which we could access to supplement our instruction in ag, econ, crop production, and career prep related classes? I will note that there's a relatively new Casey's located about 20 minutes from our campus.
Oh, that's a good one, Nathaniel.
I'm going to come back to that one. I'm not sure I can answer that in the appropriate time. So if you can, send me that question and his contact, and we'll circle back on that.
I will send you that question, but we will go ahead and award.
Great question.
A gift card. Don't worry, Scott, you will get one. I've got a question from Leslie. The different types of pumps and sales options were very interesting. Are these based off of regional trends? Are there upgrade opportunities as locations are remodeled?
Yeah, so I will tell you, every new store we build gets that far. So the picture that's on the screen right now, every new store we build, whether it's in Iowa, Indiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, wherever, Michigan, the pumps will look like that. So we will sell higher blends at every new store we open, which is great, right? It's a great win. Every raise and rebuild will get higher blends. One thing that's actually helping us get more higher blends into the market is we're trying to solve for, I won't bore you with the details, but there's a fraud shift that's happening within our industry where Visa and MasterCard shifts credit card fraud to Casey's and other retailers next year. And so as we go through that, we actually need to do some enhancements around hardware, around dispensers. And so that's a way that we're also taking this approach to try to change up that capacity. The challenge tends to be, though, as you know, it's less about what's above the ground, but more what's below the ground. And so still working through a lot of things with tanks and piping. I know ACE did some great things around developing some resources for us to really check what's compatible and what's not. But we are testing those scenarios all across the U.S. And across our 16 states to try to figure out, is it a test and learn environment that creates different types of responses, whether you're in Iowa, Nebraska, or wherever you're at. So we're trying those different types of things depending on the market we're in.
Yeah, Nathaniel, no, these are great. And all the questions, I know if we don't get to everybody, which we'll have to do a transition now for the next guest, but you really set up the next presentation nicely, Nathaniel, because you're absolutely right. State by state has different fuel codes and regulations, and you have to navigate that with every state. I do not envy your position on that. So when we do see different types of hoses and nozzles and how you can dispense them, it can be a little tricky, and it is, at the end of the day, I'd love to just see Unleaded 88 like you have a lot of locations at just the new regular. Well, Nathaniel, I just want to say thank you for taking the time today. I know you're very busy with your over 2,200 locations now and growing. Good luck with the new merger and acquisition with Bucky's. I know that's going to be very successful, and I just want to say thank you so much, and I look forward to hosting and having you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me and looking forward to it.
Hey guys, I just want to note really quick for our audience that Cresswell Heiser and Tom Beckman were our other two question askers. So you guys will get gift cards, and I will send your questions directly to Nathaniel and get you a written answer back. But I really appreciate the robust, actually, Nathaniel, I'm going to have probably a dozen questions to send you.
Send them my way. Yep.
Afterwards. So we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, Nathaniel and Elena.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elena and Nathaniel, thanks again for that very insightful discussion about the work that we're doing on here in Indiana, and the presence of Casey's here in Indiana has certainly been good to see the expansion of biofuels options in Indiana. So thanks again for your presentation, your time with us today. I just want to talk a little more about what's going on here in Indiana with regards to biofuels. There is going to be some legislation this year as it relates to gasohol. There was a couple of years ago I first heard of this concern, and And frankly, I hadn't heard the term gasohol for quite a few years, because we refer to ethanol as ethanol blended fuel. I haven't really heard much about gasohol since President Ford was stumbling down the stairs of Air Force One. So it's been quite a while. I mean, probably since Pat Benatar was telling us to hit her with her best shot. So it's been several years since I've heard the term gasohol. However, it is still on the books here in Indiana, that term, and that's needed to be updated, because EPA has allowed for year-round sales starting in May of 2019. And we need to update that code to provide some certainty for blenders and retailers. And we are working on legislation to get that done, so we can again provide that certainty for the blenders and the retailers, so they can allow for an additional E15 blends here in Indiana. Just working the coalition to get this done. Country Mark is kind of leading that effort. Indiana Ethanol Producers Association is involved. Corn Growers Association is involved, as well as Indiana Farm Bureau and some others. So it's really a broad coalition of agriculture and ethanol interest, and also refining interest to get this language upgraded or updated, so we pave the way for more E15 sales here in Indiana. Just so you know, in case you hear from us through session that we need some action from our members, it is going to be authored by Senator Mark Mesmer of Du Bois County. He's he's the chairman of the Senate Environmental Affairs Committee, and he's going to be carrying this legislation. And the General Assembly starts January 4th. I do want to mention just again that this year's session is going to be a little more of a challenge than other years, just simply because of the COVID restrictions that are going to be in place to keep the session as safe as possible. So the House session is going to be held outside of the Capitol building itself. It's going to be at the Government Center South, and the Senate's going to operate their business there in the State House. So it's the flow of the session is going to be a little different. And of course, it's a long session. It's the budget year. So there's a lot of work to be done surrounding the budget. And we're going to certainly watch that, as well as other agricultural issues. But just know that it's going to be a little different this year, given the safeguards that the leadership at the State House has put in place because of the COVID concern. And mentioning the General Assembly, I just want to do a shout out to Representative Don Leahy, Chair of the House Ag Committee. He is on the webinar with us today, as well as I believe Senator Stoops has joined us also. So thanks to the two of them for taking time to be with us today. So next up, we heard what we were doing here within Indiana to advance biofuels. And we're going to bring on National Corn Growers Association to talk about the Next Generation Fuels Act. This has been an effort that National Corn Growers has worked on for a number of years, alongside of some other stakeholders, to build out this legislative effort. And with us today is Kathy Bergren. She's the Director of Biofuels for NCGA. Kathy, thanks so much for joining us. It's good to see you, and I'm sure things in Washington are rather hectic, and we really appreciate your work that you do for ethanol, but also pass on our thanks to the rest of the staff. I know there's a full staff in Washington, and that's one of the benefits that you get with your Indiana membership. Both Corn and Soy have national organizations that work on our behalf day in and day out right there on Capitol Hill. And we appreciate your work. And again, we'll be hearing from Mike Beard later about the benefits of membership, but I just want you to know that as an Indiana member, you're also an NCGA member. So Kathy, what do you have to tell us about the New Generations Fuels Act, or any other ethanol related issues that may have popped up in the past few days?
Well, no, thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate joining you all in Indiana today. Certainly, I think kind of building off of what we heard from the last presentation. We heard Nathaniel and Elena talking about kind of how the fuels market continues to change, and certainly there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of competition. And I think we really look at for ethanol, for biofuels, we feel like we've really had a lot of success from the renewable fuel standard as a federal policy. It's been very successful, especially for you all, both on the ethanol and biodiesel side of the coin. And I think we really look at how do we take where we are with the renewable fuel standard and look forward and build on that success to continue to keep renewable fuels competitive and to have an important role in the marketplace going forward. So I think for the National Corn Growers Association, we've been working very closely with all of the state associations, including Indiana Corn, on a lot of different avenues, to really make sure that we're looking forward and thinking about how we stay competitive in the long term. And one of those, I think one of those important pieces of the solution on the ethanol side is some legislation that we've been working on and that was introduced this fall by Congresswoman Bustos. She is from Illinois, but we've been working with her and her staff and also with ethanol producers on this legislation. It's really built on work from a really broad range of stakeholders on the technical side as well, certainly including automakers and others. So there's a lot of really good technical work that's gone into this legislation to, again, really look at how do we build on the success of the RFS to really continue to be competitive and support ethanol demand in the future. This is a very forward-looking bill. This is not something that's going to really talking about a transition in the gasoline supply. So that's not something that's going to be immediate. But I think if we don't start taking these steps now, we don't really ever get to that point. So really what this legislation does is really kind of emphasize a few different things in this space. Really, we're transitioning the gasoline supply to gasoline with a higher octane content. I think as saw some of the pictures on the pumps there that were part of Nathaniel's presentation. As we know that you saw the 87 and the 88. We, across the country typically measure, octane on those terms. It's AKI, anti-knock index. And this would really change the way that we're measuring octane and increase the octane requirement for gasoline. It would be measured on a different scale. It's called RON, Research Octane Number. And what higher octane fuel allows automakers to do is design more efficient engines that get more miles per gallon, that reduce emissions. And they know they have the technology to make these more efficient engines right now, but you don't get those efficiency benefits when you're running those engines on kind of a standard regular gasoline right now that's at a lower octane level. So I think the idea behind transitioning the gasoline supply to higher octane is really the really broad range of benefits that you get from this. Again, improving fuel efficiency, reducing emissions, and really for us, ethanol is really the most cost-effective source of additional octane. Ethanol by itself has a very high octane rating and other properties that really work well with these more advanced engines. Ethanol also has the benefit of being the lowest cost. So we're really providing the greatest benefit by blending more ethanol at the least cost to drivers, and at the same time really replacing some of the most harmful petroleum-based components in gasoline. So what does this mean for farmers? Over time, and again, this is a long-term transition for the gasoline supply. I think if we look at history, people will remember the transition to unleaded gasoline. So it'd be a similar type of transition. So we know it takes a while, but I think when fully implemented, would really increase ethanol demand and therefore corn demand over the long term. So I think that's why this really remains an important priority for NCGA and working with state corn grower associations. I think if we sort of look at the current kind of context, there's certainly a lot of interest around reducing emissions. The transportation sector is a significant source of both carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as other pollutants. And so I think we have an opportunity to look at how high octane fuels can really be part of this overall solution that is a lot of interest on the federal policy level of reducing emissions. When you have more efficient engines that are paired with matched with the right kind of fuel, those engines are much more fuel efficient. So you're reducing fuel usage, reducing emissions that way. And by requiring that additional octane come from low carbon sources such as ethanol, we're also doing more to reduce carbon emissions through this proposal. So I think really we look at this legislation doesn't require a specific level of ethanol blending, but really removes the barriers to mid-level ethanol blends up to a 30% blend, and then also puts some guardrails in place, such as requiring octane to come from low carbon sources, to put a new cap on portions of gasoline that are referred to as aromatics. These are some of the most toxic components of gasoline, and ethanol also replaces those. And so that really helps us continue the progress that has been made when we're blending 10% ethanol, and really opens the door to higher blends in the future to really continue to improve gasoline so that gasoline remains competitive in the long term. I think we'll see a lot of discussion in Congress around reducing carbon emissions. This is certainly a priority across Congress and in the administration. I think the good news for ethanol is ethanol is a low carbon fuel, and you can kind of see on this chart the progress that ethanol is making, reducing its carbon footprint, while at the same time we see the carbon footprint of gasoline, unblended gasoline, is going up. I think that really speaks to the attributes of ethanol that this legislation really capitalizes on. We have lower carbon, higher octane, and lower cost for both of those really create an advantage for ethanol going forward that we need to really take advantage of in this. So I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of the legislation. I think we certainly want, it's really important for, folks like you, members of Indiana corn growers, to feel comfortable with this legislation. That said, I don't think everybody, we don't all need to, the details are important, but really the big picture, I think, on this legislation is really helpful when it comes to, talking to members of Congress and their staff. And I think because this legislation does a lot of different things and takes advantage of the different characteristics, we can really talk about this legislation with different members of Congress and their staff and really hit on the things that are most important to them. If there's members who really are prioritizing and we need to reduce emissions, we've got that covered here. if we have, folks who are concerned about, well, I want to make sure that, fuels and vehicles remain affordable, and that consumers really continue to have a choice. This really helps, drivers have a choice in the future of the fuels and vehicles that are affordable and meet their needs. And for, and I think for members of Congress who really want to, care about, what's going to help drive demand in agriculture and in rural economies, we also, this also, factors into that as well. I mean, that's really where we come into that on the corn grower side is really the impact that this is going to have, going forward in terms of increasing demand. So what have we been doing since this legislation's been introduced? We've certainly been working on, outreach to members of Congress and their staff, and, kind of really helping educate them on this. This is a new issue for a lot of them, just like it is for a lot of us. Certainly appreciate, I know that you all in Indiana have been, reaching out to some of your members of Congress, and really encourage you to continue to do that. Like I said, really sort of, getting the, engaging the grassroots on this. I would point out that there are a lot of resources on this legislation that are on NCGA's website, ncga.com/octane. These resources are really aimed at, at our members and helping you kind of understand the background of this and the big picture on this bill. There's some good videos, other fact sheets. So I would really, really encourage you to use those resources to help learn more about this issue. And then we've also really been working to get feedback from other stakeholders that we feel that are important to this process, such as those in the environmental communities, automakers, and others in agriculture. And as we go forward, as we know, when you get to the end of a congressional session like we are right now, all legislation comes to an end, and something has to be reintroduced in January. So we're really working with our bill sponsor, and hopefully other members of Congress who want to co-sponsor this legislation, to kind of consider any input from stakeholders as we look at reintroducing this legislation. Again, asking members of Congress, particularly those in corn states, to co-sponsor this legislation. We'll be looking at a companion legislation in the Senate. I think we feel like it's very important that this be bipartisan legislation. Most of the things that we do in agriculture really do work best when they're bipartisan, whether it's regard to biofuels, trade, crop insurance, farm bill. All of those things really require bipartisan support. And this is probably not a piece of legislation that is going to move by itself. That seems pretty unlikely. So I think we're really trying to position this legislation, as really part of the solution for reducing emissions from the transportation sector. A really good piece of that solution that really helps keep biofuels and liquid fuels modernized and relevant for the long run. I think we hear a lot about electric vehicles. We hear a lot about other alternative technologies and fuels. I think we want to make sure that that biofuels are part of that solution and are able to compete on a level playing field, and a higher octane standard for gasoline, kind of coupled with low carbon requirements, really takes advantage of the best things that ethanol has to offer, and really helps keep those fuels and vehicles competitive over the long term. So that's really an important part of what we're doing. I guess I will, talk a little bit about, some of the specifics of the legislation. Again, we're really going to increase the octane requirement for gasoline to a minimum of 98 RON. What does that mean if you look at the pump today? That's the equivalent. Today's regular 87 is the same as a 91 RON. So this would be a pretty good bump in octane. But this, again, this is what allows automakers to use the knowledge and technologies they have to make these, optimized, more efficient engines that are going to run that need a higher octane fuel to operate. Really feel like this level of octane really opens the door to mid-level ethanol blends such as E25 and E30 are really the most efficient and cost-effective way to get to that higher octane level. Again, requirement that these sources of octane have fewer greenhouse gas emissions than gasoline. It's really kind of as guardrails here to help direct that this additional octane comes from ethanol. Not a mandate, not a requirement, but really setting the standards to steer that direction and really prevent backsliding away from the progress that we've already made on blending more renewable fuels. A couple of other parts of the legislation, and we don't have to go into these, but we really remove there's a lot of barriers to higher mid-level blends of ethanol that kind of need to be moved out of the way. We know we've talked a lot about the barriers on RVP that allow year-round sales of E15. Really kind of build on that and move up to where an approval for blends up to E30, give all of those blends the same type of treatment as we're giving E15 right now. So that there's room in more space in the tank for our products. And then finally, we really look at on the vehicle and infrastructure side. So it does require automakers for future model years to design and warrant all vehicles for use on higher octane fuel and with ethanol blends up to 30%. We also require new refueling infrastructure to be compatible with higher blends. This really helps build on the investments that are already being made in infrastructure because a lot of the new pumps and other infrastructure going in is already warranted and designed for these higher blends. That's something we really want to future-proof the infrastructure that people are installing now. And then we also the bill also would reestablish credits for flex fuel vehicles that automakers get. And really kind of helps put more vehicles on the road that are capable of handling higher blends of ethanol, E85, but also these mid-level ethanol blends as well. So those are kind of the more specifics of the legislation. But again, I think really the big picture here is really how do we be forward thinking, building on the success of the RFS. And really looking at, how do we modernize gasoline by allowing additional ethanol content, requiring a higher octane value that really takes advantage of the efficiency, lower emissions, and better affordability that ethanol is going to bring, to the gasoline supply going forward. So that's a lot of information. I know, kind of an overview. I know some of you have probably seen some information here on this before, but certainly happy to answer any questions and have some discussion. Again, really would encourage you to take advantage of a lot of those resources on the NCGA website. I imagine there's some on Indiana Corn as well. Whether it's some of the videos from engine researchers that really kind of get into the nuts and bolts if you're really into that side of things, to some of our grower leaders talking about the importance here, and really some resources that you can use when you want to reach out to your member of Congress and your staff to talk about how this is a big priority for corn growers going forward.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I know that it's very technical. This legislation has been several a year and a half in the works because it is so technical, and it's not no surprise that it's going to take some additional discussions with folks to get them acclimated to the concept. We've had conversations with our delegation, and they've been very receptive. Nobody signed on yet, but again, it is very technical, and it's going to take some time. It's going to take several touches, I believe, to really get folks familiar with this to where they do feel comfortable talking about it and then agreeing to it. So just, for members, just kind of stick with us. It's going to be it's going to be a long haul. This is a big lift. It's like you obviously covered. It's it's a new concept. So don't feel bad if you don't really fully understand it yet. We'll continue to provide information so you can adequately advocate for this. And we've had some action alerts that come out from NCGA. We've had several members that have responded to those. So if you have, thank you. Those do make a difference. We do hear from the congressional staff that they have heard from our members. So those do get noticed. So when we do send those out, please take a look at it. Consider your response on that. We will do one today after the session. We'll send out to members to action alert to contact our delegation. So I know that don't have a lot of time here, but just Kathy, real quick, is there kind of a timeline on when you think it'll be reintroduced in the next Congress? I know we're with any legislation in Congress, it's going to the current Congress ends at the end of the year, and then a new Congress will pick up. So HR 8371 would have to be acted upon yet this month if it were to pass. So but there is a full intention to get that reintroduced next year. Are we looking at January, February, March? Would it be longer than that?
I don't, I think probably early in the new year. I think we'd like to make sure we, have the, work with our bill sponsor and any other members who, kind of want to join the party on this to try to get this reintroduced, in fairly short order. I think that helps, when we want to be talking about this bill with members of Congress and their staff to really kind of have something concrete to point to. Because like you said, this is going to take a lot of conversations. It's going to take more than one. It is a new concept. It's really about, ensuring where we've got a good looking future ahead. So that does take time. I think we are taking some time to really make sure we're, hearing from other stakeholders and, and if there's some opportunity to, kind of bring them along in this process, we want to do that. But we're not gonna, I think we don't want to, kind of drag out reintroduction too far either. So I think probably, fairly short order in the new Congress, to try to, keep some momentum building and growing. I think it's been, even though this bill was introduced late in the session, it's really helped us, reach out to members of Congress and their staff to kind of start the conversation. Even though we knew the bill's not going to go anywhere right now, but it's helped start the conversation. And so we want to be able to pick that up early in the next year and keep it moving forward.
All right. Well, thanks again so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking time to be a part of this year's forum, and look forward to what we can get accomplished yet this year with this bill and then the reintroduction of the next. So thanks again for all that you do for us out in Washington, D.C.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. So next up, we're going to bring in Mike Beard. He's the president of the Indiana Corn Growers Association. As I mentioned earlier, we can't do this work without your membership and the corporate partners. And thanks again to First Farmers Bank and Trust and Bain Welker. But Mike, we need to hear from you on membership, so fire away.
Can you hear me? That's what I need to know.
Yes, we can. Okay,
well, I can't see me, so that's fine. But thanks a lot, Steve. This has been a good presentation. Kathy talked to us about a new legislative effort. It takes us to make a legislative effort move forward, and it takes the membership reaching out to their legislators to let them know that they have support in their districts for new legislation that will affect the lives of their constituents. And ethanol exists because of legislative policy. Changing to high octane funds to high octane fuels is also going to require legislative effort. So we need to realize that corn checkoff and soy checkoff funds cannot be used to lobby Congress. So it falls to our membership organizations that we interact with, our legislators and regulators, to make that happen. And funding for these organizations is voluntary. It's by members and sponsorships. And boy, we need both. We need the sponsorships for our funding, and we need more members to help carry our message. The members' relationship with the legislator is what gets our voices heard. So this is my plea to all of you out there. If you're not a member now, please consider joining Indiana Corn Growers and Indiana Soybean Alliance. Of course, you're going to have to do it virtually, but we've been doing this a long time that way. Visit our websites. We've got a special deal for you. We've always got a special deal for you. Thank you all for considering this. Thanks also, I got to say thanks to Steve and Rachel for the yeoman's job they've done. They've done more start and stop, reverse direction, pivot more times than the Boilers did last night. And I think they've scored a lot of 3-pointers too. And it was a big score today. This was a great message. Please, if you, again, the membership message is if you're not a member now, we think there's value in being a member. Give it a try. We need you. We need your voice. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. Thanks for the kind words. It's a great team that we have here. We couldn't do it alone. We certainly can't do it without our members and without our farmer leaders. You guys set the direction for the organizations. We just carry out those wishes. So we need your leadership, and thank you for that. It's been very much appreciated as you've been at the helm of the Corn Growers Association. I think we're just about ready to wrap up. We got I believe a slide or two yet. I do want to welcome you to join us tomorrow, 11 a.m. tomorrow. We're going to talk, the main focus tomorrow is grain markets. We're going to discuss an effort to improve the grain indemnity fund in the General Assembly this year. So we're going to be joined by Amy Cornell with the Indiana Agribusiness Council. And then also Andy Tower with Farm Bureau. We're going to talk about the Ag Group's efforts to come together and make improvements to the Grain Indemnity Fund. And then we're going to be hearing a market update from our own Ed Ebert. He's going to provide that general outlook, what he thinks is going to happen with our grain markets going forward in the next few weeks, few months. So maybe even a further outlook than that. But I know Ed has always been a favorite presenter of ours, so we look forward to that. So if you have not registered for that, you have to register for each session separately. So please visit our website and soybeanalliance.com/forum to register. Also, Friday we're going to be that's our final session. Our keynote's going to be brought to us by Nick Welker of Welker Farms, farmer out in Montana, great young guy that's done a lot to share his farming story on YouTube, and it'll just be interesting to see how he operates and what his perspective is in agriculture today. So that's going to be Friday at noon. Please register for that as well. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.